because I think this team is extremely overrated. And in every game that they play, we are going to be able to bet the other side because there is going to be a Caitlin Clark tax, right? So in a game where Iowa probably should be 2.5, 3-point favorites, they might be 5.5, 6.5-point favorites because odds makers are no dummies. And they know that everybody looking to bet is going to bet Iowa because of Caitlin, because they want to root for her. They want to bet on her. They trust her. They know she scores 30, 40 points a game. And Iowa's just not as good a team as I think everybody perceives them to be. And certainly they're not going to be as good as these numbers that they're going to be laying because it's going to be such one-sided action on the Hawkeyes. You saw that last night with West Virginia. Mountaineers were 15.5-point dogs. That game was never really a sweat. They lose by 10, but it was tied with like 3 minutes to go. So they're playing a Colorado team, Rob, in the Sweet 16 that beat LSU to open the season. And I'm interested to see where this line ends up going on tip-off for Saturday between Iowa and West Virginia. But I've had that thought process on Iowa since the tournament started. I've been talking about it on my show. They are going to be an auto fade for me because somebody's going to get them, and these lines that they're going to be getting are going to be inflated every time that they take the court. What are your thoughts on the Hawkeyes?
Listen, I actually completely agree. I will acknowledge that I am a big Caitlin Clark stan. I enjoy watching the young lady play ball. I enjoy those logo threes just like I do when Dame Lillard puts them up for sure. At the same time, I totally agree with your take on Iowa basketball. And if there is one thing that I would bring up, it's Colorado has already beaten not just LSU, they beat USC. When they were number 6, they beat Kansas State. When they were number 15, they beat number 12 Utah. They beat number 8 Stanford. This team has run through a list of who's who across women's college basketball. They're wildly balanced. They are just as happy to take their slow time playing offense as they are to get into a track meet if that's what the game calls for. So, listen, there is one thing that is kind of a hindrance right now for those of us that are fading the Iowa Hawkeyes game by game, and I think you saw it last night. I hate this when people call my show and they talk about this. I usually run them off the air. When I'm out with the boys and they start chirping about this, I usually fire back, and that is officiating assistance. But last night, man, even I had a hard time arguing that there wasn't a little bit of Caitlin Clark whistle fandom going on, man. Like, you ended the game, a game where you had two teams with very similar foul counts at the end of the first half. In the second half, West Virginia had Iowa's foul count doubled up plus some. Was it like 27-12 was the final personal foul count in this game? And it just felt like down the stretch, it was kind of protecting the Hawkeyes. Now, I know that's a big conspiracy theory. I'm not asking anybody but to believe that is what happened, but it was the conversation happening on social media. So I am with you on fading Iowa, but I'll tell you what I'm going to wait for. I'm going to wait for them to bump into one of the other teams that gets attention. I'm going to wait for them to bump into Stanford, into LSU, into South Carolina in the finals. I'm going to wait for them to bump into one of the teams that is a better team than Iowa and also has some superstars. Now, South Carolina doesn't have that one individual superstar. They should. Carmela Cardoso is a beast underneath the rack, and I love watching her play. Chloe Kitts is a G, but they're not on the same level as Angel Reese and Haley Van Lith and Caitlin Clark. So I'm with you on the fade wagon. I am going to say, however, it's not going to be against Colorado. I do think Colorado can win that game, and I don't think you're wrong if you do decide to play the fade on Colorado. I'm going to wait and see who they get matched up with in the Elite Eight. I'm going to wait to see if they get matched up down the line with, like I said, a Stanford and LSU, a South Carolina in the championship game. And if and when they do, that's when I think your strategy will really come into play, when the protection for Caitlin Clark is gone because the drama's heightened. If Caitlin Clark gets bounced, she went 2 years without doing it. Is she a failure? Could we consider Caitlin Clark a failure with no ring? Flip side, if Angel Reese, who has drawn the ire of many college basketball fans, is the one to knock off Caitlin Clark, there's drama in that. If Caitlin Clark makes it to the Natty against the Gamecocks, can Dawn Staley unlock beating Caitlin Clark? There's some drama in that. So I think your fade play comes in, PJ, once the drama gets to the roof. And I think it's one of those three teams that escalate it there.
I had Clemson in the Sweet 16 too, and I like them plus 7.5 against Arizona in this game. Rob, odds makers have been on the money so far in the tournament with Arizona. Think about it. They were 20.5-point favorites against Long Beach State. They won by 20. They were 9.5-point favorites against Dayton in the round of 32. They won by 10. Odds makers, they're just been on it so far with Zona. They have been right with these numbers by the hook. They've either covered or they have come up short. Clemson is a team, it's about matchups for them. The reason I liked them in the first two rounds against New Mexico and Baylor was because they were going against elite offensive teams. New Mexico, especially a team that wants to push the ball. Clemson this year, you know, you look at their non-conference schedule and certainly playing against Carolina and Duke in ACC play, they have played elite offenses this year on their schedule, and they have played against some teams that want to push the pace. They played New Mexico in that round of 64 game. They played Baylor. They've played Bama this season. They've played Memphis. They've played TCU, obviously Carolina, Duke. They've beaten a lot of these teams, Rob, and when they didn't, they lost to Memphis by 2. They lost to Duke at Cameron Indoor by 1. Like, all these games that they play against offensive juggernauts, something about their team, they play really well against those teams. So I think it's a good matchup for them. You bring up a good point about PJ Hall, and it's going to be tough going up against some of the bigs that Arizona has with Ballo, and they bring a 7-footer off the bench. They just got athletic wings and guys that can get you into foul trouble. So I do think it could be tough for PJ. Certainly, they're going to need him on the floor in a game like this. But those guards, man, Chase Hunter, Joe Girard, been impressed with them. Those are seniors that have played a ton of big games, played a lot of minutes, and they've been awesome for them so far in the tournament. Clemson's defense has also been a lot better through the first 2 games than it has been for much of the regular season. So I like them in this spot, Rob. I like Clemson plus the points. I don't know. I mean, they could win the game. I don't think I'm going to take them on the money line, but this is going to be a game where maybe Arizona's up double digits. Clemson kind of makes their run, cuts it down to 3 or 4, and then Arizona's going to kind of need to do what they did against Dayton, where they get up, Dayton makes their run, and every time Arizona needed to answer, they ended up doing that. But Clemson's going to be tough. We know the kind of tournament the ACC's having. Clemson was a team that was really good in the non-conference. Ken Barkley talks about it all the time on this show. When you're handicapping March Madness, the non-conference means more than the regular season does. And Clemson's a perfect example of that. They were a team that wasn't great in the ACC this year, but they were excellent in the non-conference. Beat a ton of teams that made the tournament. Bama, as I mentioned, TCU, as I mentioned, South Carolina, Boise State, UAB. They beat all these teams that were in the big dance. So, Rob, it's a team that's battle-tested. They're one of the older teams in college basketball. I think this is too many points. So, I like Clemson in the game, plus 7.5.
Yeah, no, I am most certainly good with Clemson plus the points. I am very good with Clemson plus the points. I can't bet Arizona in this game for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And like I said, I think there has been a lot of criticism of Brad Brownell, the head coach, or at least there is down here. I'm an hour away from that campus, so we cover them very closely. There's been a lot of criticism, and I have pointed out that I think this team got snubbed last year. I thought this team was a tournament team last year. In fact, I thought they were one of the bigger snubs, and I think that they had a very similar roster in terms of talent last year. I think this was a Sweet 16 caliber team last year that just didn't get the invite because the ACC was stacked last year. This year, they do get in, and I think Brad's done everything he can do to meet expectations. Now it's time for him to prove that he is that next level coach. Now it's time for him to prove that he can X and O his way into games that maybe he shouldn't win. There wasn't a spot where, like, I know they were dogs in that game against New Mexico, but you and I were on the air together, what was it, last Wednesday, PJ, and we talked about it. And I said, in no world is Clemson an underdog to me. In no world are they an underdog to New Mexico. Like, I get it. But I think what people do, and it's a mistake that I think all of us make. I think we look at basketball in terms of what have you done for me lately, right? Like, what have you done for me in the last 2-3 games? And we don't look at what a team has been all season long, which I think is a better indicator of who they truly are. Clemson's a good basketball team, have been. They're a better team than New Mexico. I thought they were probably a level team with Baylor, and I thought that could go either way. So I did bet Clemson and take the points on that one. And I'm going to take the points on this one. Now, I'm not as confident they can win this game because I do think at the end of the day, sometimes you bump into the biggest problem in sports. The biggest problem in sports, PJ, is that the other team's just better than you are. And that happens to teams all the time. And I think that Clemson's in that spot here. But you can mitigate a small talent gap with the right X's and O's and the execution. The other part of this was the end of that Baylor game. There's a spot where in Shefflin, a guy who you've been able to lean on and trust all tourney long, is suddenly jacking up threes from 5 feet behind the arc with 10 seconds left on the shot clock with no reason, no understand. And it's not like they're clean look long threes. I mean, he's contested threes from 5, 6, 7, 8 feet behind the arc. And I'm going, this is what can't happen. These little mental breakdowns, these little spots that the pressure's on and now it blows up on us. I don't think that's going to be the case because they've already put that hand on the stove and came real close to being burned. I like Clemson plus the 7.5. I'm not ready to say full money line upset yet, but I think you can make some money riding the Tigers one more on the point line. Talk to me about Clemson in the Sweet 16. PJ and I went back and forth on this team a little bit earlier, and I've said to me, this game hinges not so much on PJ Hall, a guy who has missed as much as half the game like he did in the win over Baylor. It hinges on the guards. It hinges on Joe Girard, on Shefflin, on Hunter. It hinges on the outside play of Clemson, which is wild for a team that has an All-American big man. What does this team need to do to get by Arizona? Can they get by Arizona, and how are you looking at and playing this game?
I definitely think they can get by Arizona. I was not a believer of Clemson this weekend, and PJ tried to talk me into Clemson over Baylor, and I was steadfast in saying I think Baylor's more talented. I think they have the better coach, and I lost money on that. I think you're 100% right. Their guard play is going to be huge against Arizona because I think they find themselves in a very similar situation where if you're just looking at the rosters on paper, you see a team in Arizona that is almost overflowing with talent, and they have guys, specifically in Caleb Love, that have had success in the NCAA tournament. But there's something about not just Clemson, but really the entire ACC. We cast doubt on them the entire season. The ACC is overrated. The ACC is down bad. Everything you could imagine being said poorly about the ACC was said, and the only thing they've done, with the exception of UVA, in the NCAA tournament is score a lot of points and win a lot of basketball games. So I absolutely think that they can hang tight with Arizona, but it's really going to come down to coaching. And Clemson, I mean, credit to that entire staff, but the way they've handled the coaching situation, some of these coaching matchups, I would have never thought that Scott Drew would have gotten out coached by really anybody. But the way that Clemson's been able to hang in the NCAA tournament, I would say right now, if you think they don't have a chance, you haven't been paying attention.